The waitress leaned in, whispering into the billionaire's ear, "Don't sign. They're setting you up." Those 4 words silenced the powerful room, and his next move left everyone stunned. No one in the luxurious room suspected that. Just seconds later, the man who once commanded respect across New York City would stand up and leave, all because of a whisper from an unknown waitress. Alexander Alex Sterling sat at the head of the table in the private dining room of the Summit Room restaurant. The air was thick with the scent of expensive leather and the earthy umami of truffle through the large window. The city at night sparkled like a forgotten treasure, but the real treasure lay on the table, the merger agreement, valued at €380 million. With the Fairmont Group, dinner was over. Dessert plates had been cleared. Now was the time for the real main course. The smiles had lost their polite veneer, becoming more greedy. A bottle of fine cognac had been poured, ready for a final toast. The folder containing the future of an entire empire was opened before everyone. Alex picked up his Mont Blanc pen, its body cold in his palm. He adjusted it, his thumb lightly stroking the 18-karat gold. Every sound in the room seemed to fade, leaving only the rustle of papers as the Fairmont Group's lawyer slid the document towards him. The gold nib was mere millimeters from the paper. Just then, the service door quietly opened. A waitress stepped in, a silver tray in her hands. To clear the last coffee cups, she moved lightly, efficiently, almost invisible among the giants, holding their breath. Awaiting a signature, she approached Alex's chair, leaning down to take his cup. Everything was strictly routine. But then, she paused for a second, pretending to rearrange items on the silver tray. She leaned slightly to one side, her neatly pinned hair almost brushing his suit jacket shoulder. Her breath exhaled a warm current of air. And then she whispered. The sound wasn't spoken words. It was like a thought transmitted directly into his brain. Sharp and dangerous. "Don't sign." A silence that lasted 1,000th of a second. Then she spoke again. A little clearer. Enough for the deadliness in it to become palpable. "This is a trap." Alex froze. Completely. The blood in his veins seemed to congeal. The pen in his hand, the weapon he had used to conquer the business world, now felt heavy as a stone. His hand, always steady, stopped just millimeters from the paper. The pen slipped from his numb fingers. It didn't fall hard, just gently rolled onto the oak table, making a small clink. But in Alex's mind, the sound echoed like a gunshot. What was that? He thought. Stunned. The girl slowly straightened. For an instant, their eyes met. Her eyes were deep, calm, and held a terrifying seriousness. Then she turned away, without hesitation, as if she had just informed him his coffee was cold. She placed the cup on the tray and began walking towards the service door, her steps steady, as if it were just part of her daily work. But Alex couldn't take his eyes off her back. Each of her steps seemed to pull his mind out of the room. Alex, Marcus, his business partner and longtime friend, leaned towards him. His smile looked slightly strange. "Everything all right, Mr. Sterling?" "Mr." Harrison asked from the other side of the table, his voice tinged with impatience. "Are you ready to sign?" Alex swallowed, his throat dry. The contract remained untouched. He looked at Harrison, who was smiling in anticipation. He looked at Marcus, the friend he had trusted for 20 years, and finally, at the door, where the waitress was about to disappear. The world seemed slightly off-kilter. Was she right? Or was she crazy? A trap? But why? And why her? "I need 5 minutes," he said abruptly, his voice hoarse. Then he stood up quickly, his chair scraping loudly on the floor behind him. 5 minutes? Marcus tried to keep his voice light, but his eyes narrowed slightly, a sign of annoyance. "Is everything okay? You just need to sign." 5 minutes. Alex replied, looking at no one. He strode quickly toward the door. Mr. Sterling, Harrison protested, his voice starting to reveal irritation. Everyone is here. All terms have been reviewed. There's nothing left to change. This is disrespectful. 5 minutes. Alex growled, his determination cold as steel in every syllable. Without waiting for further protest, he walked out the door and slammed it shut behind him. The sound echoed down the empty corridor. The waitress was only a few steps from the end of the hall, hearing his hasty, almost running footsteps behind her. She stopped. She didn't turn immediately, just stood still. As if awaiting the inevitable, Alex blocked her path, forcing her to face him. They were in the transition area between the dining room and the kitchen. Under cold white light, he stared at the anonymous girl who had stirred up his world with just 4 words. "What's your name?" he asked, his voice low and dangerous. She looked up, her eyes utterly fearless. "Elisa." Alex repeated the name, as if to engrave it in his memory. "Elisa." "All right, Elisa. You have 5 sentences to explain your recklessness, before I have you escorted out of here. I overheard them discussing shifting shares out of your control," she stated plainly. Alex scoffed, a dry, humorless laugh. "You're amusing me. A waitress overhearing an economic conspiracy. Do you think I'm a child?" "It wasn't eavesdropping," she replied, her voice strangely calm. "It was wiping down the table when they forgot I was there. People often forget that servers have ears." Alex was silent for a second, assessing her. "Do you have proof, or just a vivid imagination?" She looked him straight in the eye, without blinking. "I will. Tonight. Just 4 words. No further explanation." Alex watched her for a moment longer, trying to find signs of deceit, blackmail, or insanity, but he only saw stark truth in the depths of her eyes. He spun around, leaving her standing there, and quickly returned to the dining room. Every step was a recalculation in his head. When Alex opened the door and walked in, the room fell silent. All eyes were on him. Harrison still looked annoyed. Marcus looked relieved to see him return. "Everything okay?" "Alex?" Marcus asked, pushing the pen back toward him. Alex didn't answer right away. He walked to his seat, slowly sat down. He looked at the contract, then at the waiting, expensive gold pen. He didn't pick up the pen. Instead, he picked up his glass of cognac, brought it to his lips, but didn't drink, then set it down forcefully. The sound of the glass base hitting the tabletop was sharp and broke the silence. He placed both hands on the table, his index finger tapping 3 times. "Marcus," he said, his voice calm, but so cold that Marcus shivered. "What is it?" "Alex?" Alex looked up, staring directly into the eyes of his closest friend. "First thing tomorrow, I want a complete audit of every contract from the last 6 months." Marcus froze. Harrison gasped. "And today's meeting," Alex continued, pushing his chair back and standing up, "is over." Alex didn't return to the private room. He walked straight out of the restaurant, leaving behind the €380 million contract and the confused, powerful faces watching him. The driver rushed to open the Bentley door, but Alex waved him off. He wanted to drive himself at least, to be in control of something. Inside the car, the city noise was muffled. He picked up his phone and messaged the manager of the summit room. "Send me the number for the waitress who served the Harrison table." 30 seconds later, the number appeared. Alex didn't call. He just typed 4 words. "Meet me. Back parking lot. 11:45 p.m. The car engine roared to life, speeding away from the brightly lit street. The city slid past in the glass like a soulless streak of light. He had chased that light all his life, but tonight, it only made him feel empty. Close to midnight, behind the summit room, the parking lot was almost deserted. A cold wind blew through, carrying the damp smell of residual rain. Eliza walked slowly along the brick path, clutching her phone. She had planned to ignore the message, but then she thought of the phrase, "This is a trap," she had just uttered. If she was right, that man might be in danger, and if she was wrong, she would be responsible for making a man doubt his own allies. When the black Bentley rolled up, its headlights reflecting off the wet pavement, she became a small silhouette, standing between light and shadow. The window lowered. Alex sat in the car, his eyes sharp and cold, his voice hoarse and dry. "You actually came?" Eliza nodded slightly. "I just wanted to be sure you were safe." "Safe?" Alex chuckled, but there was no amusement in his voice. "You made me walk out on the biggest deal of my life. Do you think I should thank you?" She didn't respond. Slowly, she reached into her jacket pocket, pulled out a small black USB drive, and placed it on the armrest. "Listen to it," she said. "Then you decide if you should thank me or not." Alex looked at the small object, then plugged it into the console port. The car's music cut out, replaced by a slight static. A woman's voice emerged, "Vicky. Warm, familiar, and treacherous. Just get him to sign. Marcus, I'll handle the rest." Then another male voice, calm and cold. "Marcus, he'll never know. Not as long as he thinks he's in control." Alex gripped the steering wheel tightly, his facial muscles tensed. But he didn't say a word. In the sound of rain pattering on the roof, the recording ended with a long silence. Eliza looked at him through the rearview mirror. "Now you understand why I had to speak." Alex turned his head, his gaze clouded. "Do you think I'm stupid enough to need a waitress to teach me how to protect my own company?" The voice was strained. Not arrogant, but an effort to retain the last bit of his self-respect. Eliza replied slowly, "I don't think you're stupid. I think you put too much trust in people, especially the ones who make you forget your own instincts." Alex fell silent. That sentence hit the deepest part of his heart. A waitress speaking like a philosopher. He sighed softly. "Why did you do this? What do you gain from it?" She lowered her head slightly, her voice low. "I once lost everything because I trusted the wrong person. I don't want to see anyone else go down that road." "Do you know me?" he asked. "No," Eliza replied, her eyes reflecting a quiet understanding. "But lonely people are often the same. They're all afraid to admit they've been hurt." Alex didn't speak. He reached out and turned off the ignition. The parking lot fell into silence, broken only by the sound of wind rustling through the trees. He opened the car door, walked around to the other side, and opened the door for her. A simple gesture, yet strangely polite. They stood facing each other. Under the broken yellow light on the wet concrete, Alex looked at her for a long time, his voice deepening, no longer sharp. "You know, you just struck a match to the empire I spent my life building. If you're wrong," he paused, then shook his head slightly, "I'll pay the price. But if you're right, perhaps we are both taking a risk for the right thing." Eliza looked at him, her eyes calm. "I don't want you to believe me. I just want you to find the truth for yourself." Alex nodded softly. "I will." She turned and walked away, her silhouette merging into the faint light at the end of the parking lot. Alex remained standing, his hand still holding the open car door, his breath dissolving into the night mist. It had been a long time since his voice sounded so small. That girl, she dared to tell me the truth. In the sky, clouds drifted lazily. Below, the Bentley's engine was still running, its headlights illuminating the patchy, wet pavement like his own mind, where a small crack had just opened between power and conscience. And Alex knew, from that moment on, he could never go back to his old self, because a stranger had reminded him, the truth sometimes comes in the guise of courage. Alex didn't go home. He drove the Bentley through the empty streets, where the streetlights blurred like fragments of decaying memories. He gripped the steering wheel so tightly his knuckles were white, as if he could crush the truth he had just heard. The small black USB drive was still plugged into the console port, an alien object, small, yet changing the entire trajectory of his life. He didn't drive to his empty penthouse, nor did he seek out the familiar bars where people bowed to his power. Instead, he headed straight for the Sterling Tower, the tallest glass skyscraper downtown, the brainchild of a lifetime of building, now becoming his final sanctuary. 6 in the morning. The city was still asleep. Alex's footsteps echoed in the vast lobby, the sound of his hard heels bouncing off the cold stone walls. The private elevator took him to the top floor. When the door opened, the large office was plunged into darkness. Only the streetlights shone through the massive glass windows, casting long streaks of light onto the empty conference table. Alex didn't turn on the lights. He sat down in his chair, leaning back into the cold leather. His hand trembled slightly as he pressed play on the control panel. Just get him to sign. Marcus, I'll handle the rest. He'll never know. Not as long as he thinks he's in control. The voices echoed through the car speakers, drifting in the space, each word like a knife blade. Alex closed his eyes, listening again, and then again. With each replay, the anger no longer roared like a fire, but crystallized cold, dense, sharp. It transformed into something more dangerous, a calculated silence. In the middle of the night, reflected in the glass frame, Alex saw himself, a man who once had everything: money, power, love, and trust. Now, all that remained was the echo of lies. In that moment, he realized a simple, bitter truth, perhaps that Waitress was the only person who had told him the truth in years, a thought that tightened his chest, not from pain but from shame, because he had laughed at her, because he had used his arrogance to mask his fear, the fear of admitting that he might have lost control long ago. Alex pulled out the USB drive and opened his laptop. The pale blue light shone on his face. He opened 2 files side by side, the original merger contract and the one Harrison had sent back yesterday. Line by line, word by word, he compared them like a surgeon searching for a tumor in his own body. 15 minutes later, he saw it. A tiny detail in Annex 7B, the voting rights. A single word was changed. A sentence rewritten. At first glance, it was harmless. But through the eyes of a man who had built an empire on contracts, Alex understood immediately. A perfect trap. If he signed, control of Sterling Group would be diluted within 12 months. They would legally, smoothly, and irreversibly gain the majority of seats on the board. He scrolled down further. The indemnity clause for the new board, the hidden list. 1 seat for Harrison, 1 seat for Marcus. They had paved the escape route and stripped him of his only chance to fight back. Alex closed the laptop. The dry clack sound echoed in the quiet room, like the closing of a coffin lock. He picked up the internal phone. "Elena," he said, his voice terrifyingly steady. "I need copies of all subsidiary contracts, internal memos, and proxy agreements from the last 3 months, from Marcus's office. Bring them here immediately, and don't tell anyone." He hung up. He stood up, pacing back and forth. The external calm was just a facade. In his head, every memory of Marcus flashed. Late-night drinks, signing their first deals together, possibly Intio. The promises of "we're brothers." Brothers? A twisted smile briefly appeared on Alex's lips. In life, the thing he trusted most always betrayed him the fastest. He picked up his cell phone, scrolled through his contacts, and stopped at a familiar name. Jack Miller. The old lawyer had once warned him, "The Fairmont contract has issues." But Alex, the arrogant one, had scoffed. "You're too paranoid." "Jack, I don't need ghosts of the past to guide me." He pressed call. A hoarse, aged voice answered on the other end. Miller speaking. "Jack? It's Alex. You were right about the Fairmont Group. I need..." A click. The line went dead. Only the long, steel cold beep remained. Alex frowned and called back. No signal. The phone was off. A thin layer of dread settled over his mind. This was no longer a coincidence. They were silencing all witnesses. A primal rage welled up. He stood up abruptly, striding towards the door. The 48th floor hallway stretched out in the cold blue light of early morning. Alex walked straight toward Marcus's office. But as he reached for the doorknob, he paused. From the adjacent conference room, the door slightly ajar, a familiar voice echoed. Marcus and Vicky. Their voices were mixed with the weak static of a microphone, but clear enough to cut into his heart. "Don't worry, Vic," Marcus said, his voice confident. "He's too arrogant to imagine he's being played. Once he signs, we pull out clean. No one will know until it's too late." A pause. Then Vicky's voice smooth as honey, deadly as poison. "Are you sure?" He seemed suspicious. Marcus scoffed. "Suspicion isn't enough. He has to trust us for him to collapse." Alex clenched the doorknob. Every muscle in his arm tensed. With a gentle push, he could walk in, blow everything up, and smash those two smiling faces. But he didn't. He stood still, took a deep breath. In that moment, reason conquered instinct. This was exactly what they wanted, an out-of-control man, reacting like a cornered animal. No, Alexander Sterling was not prey. He stepped back, silent as a ghost, and returned to his office. His eyes now held no anger. They were frighteningly calm. Alex sat down in his chair, his hands clasped together. His mind was a machine running at full speed. Every gear, calculating. He couldn't trust Marcus, couldn't trust the board, couldn't trust anyone in the empire he himself had built. Only one outsider remained. The only person with nothing to lose, Eliza. He scrolled through his phone, stopping at the number saved from the night before. His finger hesitated for a moment, a rare occurrence. When the other end picked up, a woman's voice answered, calm and unfamiliar. "Hello?" Alex took a breath, his voice deep and decisive. "Tonight, I'm going to need you to do something I never thought I'd have to ask someone like you to do." He paused, looking out the wide window. The city was beginning to light up beneath the building, thousands of tiny lights twinkling like embers. And in his heart, a similar ember was beginning to burn, not just anger, but a quietly reviving trust. But Alex didn't know yet. The person he was about to trust most was the only person who could change his empire forever. The shift had lasted over 12 hours. When the summit room closed, only the smell of grease, cleaning solution, and the metallic tang of cutlery lingered in the air. Eliza was drying the last tray. Her hands trembled slightly from fatigue. Her uniform was dark with sweat, and her flat shoes were soaked. She had been working since noon, greeting guests, clearing tables, enduring the chef's outbursts. And now only the noisy dishwashing machine remained in the back kitchen. She untied her apron, put on her thin jacket, and prepared to go home. All she wanted was a few hours of sleep before dawn. Her younger sister, Chloe, was waiting in their small apartment. In the south side, she needed her heart medication on time. Passing the back door, she stopped. Outside was the service hallway, long and cold. Under sickly yellow fluorescent lights, her footsteps echoed softly on the tiles. In her jacket pocket, her old phone vibrated once. A new message. Summit Room. VIP Room 3. 10:45 p.m. Use employee entrance. She frowned. The message was unsigned, but she knew who it was. Alexander Sterling. She walked out of the kitchen area. The night air rushed in, making her shiver slightly. Around the corner of the restaurant alley, a black, glossy Bentley was parked, its engine still running. As she was about to turn, the car door opened. Alex stepped out, his dark suit blending into the night. but his eyes were bright, sharp, and full of exhaustion. She froze. "Sir, are you still here? Are you done with your shift?" His voice was deep, hoarse. "I am. I thought the matter between us was also done," she replied, a voice cold. "I only warned you because I don't want to see anyone get tricked. That's all. I don't get involved in the affairs of the rich." Alex looked at her for a long time. The wind blew through the narrow alley, carrying the smell of sea salt and the distant sound of a car engine. "Do you think I need anyone's kindness?" he said softly. "I used to think this world ran on power, until you whispered not to sign." Eliza avoided his gaze. "You have lawyers. You have money. I'm just a server. Don't drag me into this." He took a step closer, his voice dropping, almost a breath. "They are too good. That's why they betrayed me. But you have nothing to lose. Perhaps that's why you still hold on to the truth." She let out a dry laugh. "The truth doesn't pay for medicine, Mr. Sterling." Alex replied slowly, "No. But it allows a person to look straight into the mirror every morning without shame. You said that." "I remember." Eliza paused slightly. She didn't think he would remember. She looked at him, the man who used to appear in the news. Powerful, arrogant now, looking exhausted, exposed, and strangely, more real. "Tomorrow," he continued, "they will use lies to bury everything. I can't fight this alone. I need you there. Not as an ally, but as a witness. Just stand there, look them straight in the eye and say, 'I heard it.' That's all." Eliza lowered her head. Her voice choked. "I don't want to. I have a sick sister. I just want peace." Alex nodded, his gaze softening. "I understand, and I'm not asking for your loyalty. I'm only asking you once to stand on the side of what's right. If I'm wrong, you can turn your back on me right there." She was silent. The rain started to patter lightly on the metal roof behind the kitchen, falling in thick drops. In the dim light, she clearly saw his face no longer, the cold chairman, but a man struggling not to collapse. "You really trust me?" she asked softly. "For the first time in years." Alex replied, "I trust someone who has nothing in their hands." She was silent for a long time. A part of her wanted to walk away, to return to her small room, fold away a tiring day, and pretend she had never heard anything. But another, deeper part wouldn't allow it. Perhaps because in Alex's eyes, she saw what she had lost after the scandal at her former company, the belief that the truth still held value. She sighed, then said, her voice tired but firm, "All right, just this once. I'll come." Alex let out a breath, almost inaudibly. "Just this once," he said, "and I promise you won't have to stand alone again." Asar Erbaim v'chamesh p.m. VIP Room 3, where laughter and the clink of glasses once echoed. Now, only quiet light, and two people sat facing each other. Elisa sat upright, her face still showing fatigue from the long shift. She opened her phone and played a new audio file, not the USB drive recording from the night before, but another one, Marcus's voice, cold and confident. "We have the back door now. The money will move through Cayman. He'll never find it." Alex closed his eyes, listening, his face expressionless, but his hands clenched until they were white. "The back door," he repeated like a curse. "And this," Eliza said, pulling a crumpled napkin from her pocket and sliding it across. "I was clearing Marcus's office last night. He threw this in the trash. On the paper were an email address and a string of characters. Alex typed them into his laptop. The screen lit up. A series of files appeared. Statements, transfer orders, and a name he couldn't believe. Victoria Sinclair, the woman who had held his hand through parties, who had said, "We're on the same path." Now she was the one behind the scheme to drain Sterling Group. Alex was stunned. His voice was hoarse. "She lived with me. Built everything with me, from scratch. Eliza looked at him, her voice neither sharp nor soft, just enough to pull him back to reality. And now, she's helping someone else destroy it. A touch of truth painful, but necessary. Alex was silent for a long time. When he looked up, he saw Eliza standing near the doorway, the light reflecting on her face. For a moment, he saw the image of his late wife, that same look, both strong and sad, as if she understood his loneliness without needing to ask. The feeling made him unconsciously soften. He turned back to the table, his voice low and deep. "Tomorrow, you will come with me to the shareholders' meeting." Eliza nodded slightly, not out of submission, but because for the first time, she saw belief in his words, a rare belief in this world, full of pretense. Alex watched her as she walked out. The door closed gently, leaving him alone in the quiet room. Vicky's old perfume still faintly lingered, but another scent had just crept in, the smell of salt air from the night sea, the scent of a truth slowly rising. But Alex didn't know yet. The meeting tomorrow wouldn't just be a fight to reclaim his company, but the moment he had to decide, trust power or trust the woman who made him stop signing that night. The following morning, an unmarked black car stopped at the end of the small alley. The driver got out and handed Eliza a neat box. Inside were a grey business dress, low-heeled shoes, and a handwritten note: "The St. Regis Hotel, 9 a.m. Employee entrance." No greeting, no signature, but Eliza understood. Alexander Sterling didn't speak twice. She looked at herself in the foggy mirror of her small apartment. Her face was pale after a 12-hour shift, her hair hastily tied back, dark circles under her eyes, but in her gaze there was still a determined resolve, as if she had accepted going all the way, even if only this once, just this once, she told herself. Then I'll leave it all behind. The St. Regis Hotel, the smell of Italian coffee, expensive perfume, and the sound of leather shoes mingled to create an alien atmosphere. Men in suits conversed in the language of power. When Alex walked into the lobby, everyone turned to look. His figure was tall, his dark suit impeccable, his face calm, but his eyes cold. What caused the buzz was not him, but the woman walking beside him, an unfamiliar face, nor name tag, wearing only the simple grey dress. In a far corner, Marcus and Vicky were talking. When they saw Eliza, the espresso cup in Marcus's hand froze. Vicky offered a smile as thin as a knife. "That's her. The one who made you stop signing the contract," Marcus replied quietly, his eyes darkening. "Then, today, she'll pay the price for interfering in the big leagues." The 15th floor conference room. The air was thick. The sound of the air conditioning seemed distant. Alex sat in the chairman's position, and Eliza was on his right. Quiet, but poised. He stood up, his voice deep and clear. "Ladies and gentlemen, today we talk about the truth, and I want Ms. Elisa Vance, the person who dared to remind me of it, to begin." A ripple of murmurs spread across the table. Vicky chuckled softly. "Are you going to let a waitress teach you about the truth?" "Alex," he didn't reply, only nodded slightly to Eliza, a silent but trusting invitation. She stood up, her hands clasped. Her voice was calm. "I am not an expert, but I heard what everyone else ignored. A conversation about moving shares out of Mr. Bruce." Sterling's hands. She played the small voice recorder. Static rang out. Then Marcus's voice was clear. "We have the back door. The money will move through Cayman. He'll never find it." The conference room fell silent. An elderly shareholder gently adjusted his glasses. Looking at Alex, Marcus broke the silence with a brittle laugh. "Commendable. Alex, where did you find a woman with such an imagination?" Vicky chimed in, her voice cold. "Or is she just paying back the man who paid her?" Alex didn't react immediately. He only spoke softly, his gaze directed at Marcus. Then how do you explain your electronic signature in Annex 7B? Marcus froze, his lips pressed tightly. A few nearby shareholders exchanged suspicious glances. The atmosphere tilted toward Alex. But then Vicky spoke up, her voice smooth as honey. "Alex, do you know who she is?" Marcus signaled. A young assistant stepped in. Carrying a thick stack of files, he distributed them to everyone, then spoke loudly, clearly like a prosecutor. "This is the file of Eliza Vance, former employee of Tech Data Financials, fired for data theft, selling secrets to a rival." The papers were passed hand to hand, the rustling sounding like a small storm. Elisa stood still, her lips pressed together. There was no pleading in her eyes, only the sadness of someone who had been through this too many times. Marcus continued. "She disappeared, changed her name, and now she reappears right before the merger agreement. A perfect coincidence." The murmuring increased. Vicky looked at Alex, her eyes tinged with pity. "You are so easily fooled. Alex, a woman says a few moving words, and you immediately trust her more than the person who stood by you for 20 years. Alex was silent. His gaze was fixed on Eliza. She shook her head, her voice trembling but clear. "It wasn't me. I never—" But he didn't hear the rest. Amidst the noise, a silent turmoil erupted in his heart. A part of him wanted to believe. The other part feared exactly that. The image of Vicky from years ago suddenly flashed her gentle eyes, her sweet words, the same eyes, the same smile. And once again, he found himself drawn into the same old wound. Eliza backed away, her voice strained. "I didn't want to come here. I told you to stay out of this. But you pulled me in, only for them to turn me into a liar. You want the truth? Now they've given you an easier story to believe." She turned to leave. 2 security guards moved to approach her, but she said softly, "No need. I know the way out." The door closed, the sound echoing in the conference room like a final punctuation mark. Alex remained standing there, his eyes staring at the empty chair beside him. A strangely large void seeped into his heart. Marcus approached him, his voice as soft as a knife's edge. "Don't be foolish. Alex, people like her only show up when they smell power." Alex didn't reply. He only looked down at the file in front of him, cold letters, but not enough to drown out the memory of her eyes, where there had never been a hint of deceit. After a long moment, he spoke softly, his voice low enough only for himself to hear. "I just lost the only person who dared to trust me." On the high floor, sunlight streamed through the thick glass, illuminating the face of the man who once had everything. Now, he was left only with silence, and a void shaped like shattered trust. Outside, Eliza walked out of the hotel, the morning light hitting her pale face. No one knew what she was thinking. She only pulled a small memory card from her pocket, the final recording. The last card. She clutched it in her hand, whispering softly, "You want the truth, Alex? This time, you'll hear it from me." On the 15th floor, Alex still sat motionless, looking at the empty chair beside him. The room was cold. White light shone on his face, where a powerful man was learning to confront the thing he had feared all his life. The truth is not in contracts, but in the eyes of the person he just allowed to walk out the door. After the meeting, no one spoke another word to Alex. The shareholders stood up one by one, coldly, as if they had just witnessed an accident and were rushing to distance themselves from the scene. Vicky Lingo, placing her diamond-ringed hand on his shoulder, her voice soft but full of mockery. "I told you, Alex, you always trust the wrong people. And this time, you personally handed your empire over to a server." Marcus stood beside her, his smile thin as a razor. "You can keep the chairman's seat for a few more weeks, until the board votes non-confidence. You should know when to leave with dignity." Anyway, they left the room. The door closed. Alex remained seated, his eyes glazed over as if abandoned in another world. That afternoon, the press reported simultaneously, "Crisis at Sterling Group. CEO calls emergency meeting. Brings in table server as witness." The article was accompanied by a photo of Alex and Eliza leaving the elevator together. Headline suggested an inappropriate relationship. Sterling Group shares dropped 7% in just one morning. 2 board members declined to comment. Marcus appeared on television, his voice calm and self-righteous. "Mr. Sterling built this company, but all of us can lose our way sometimes. We will do everything we can to restore shareholder confidence." Vicky sat beside him, her eyes teary as if she were the betrayed one, not the betrayer. In the evening, Alex returned to his office on the top floor. The entire building was dark, only his office faintly lit by moonlight. He stood before the glass wall, looking down at the city. The lights below were like shards of glass glittering, cold and distant. In the silence, he heard the sounds in his head. "You trust the wrong people. She's just taking advantage of you. A server teaching you about trust." Each sentence was like a small knife, cutting away pieces of his conviction. Alex sat down, opening the file Marcus had left behind. Eliza Vance's name was clearly printed on the cover. Inside, termination letter, accusations, statement, Tech Data's seal. Everything was too perfect to be fake, and too perfect to be true. He asked himself if she was indeed a setup. Why would she warn him at the very beginning? If she was a traitor, why choose a path that led to public humiliation for herself? The question repeated in his mind like an echo. He leaned back in his chair, softly closing his eyes. In the darkness, he saw her eyes again, calm, clear, but containing something like disappointment. A small explosion went off in his head. A memory. The night by the docks. She said, "I lost everything trusting the wrong person. Mr. Sterling, I don't want to see anyone else go down that road." Alex opened his eyes, gasping. That sentence, "now," felt like a prophecy. Close to midnight, he opened his personal computer, connecting to the internal system. He typed her name into the Aria restaurant personnel data. A small file appeared almost empty. Name, Eliza Morales. Position, part-time server. Address, unknown. Work history, not stored. A person with no past. A ghost. Marcus was right on that point. Alex leaned back, lighting a cigarette, something he had quit years ago. Smoke curled up. Haze, guilt, disappointment. Confusion merged into a bitter, metallic taste in his mouth. Before dawn, the next day, an encrypted email arrived in his private inbox. No sender, only the subject line. The truth about Eliza Vance. He opened it. A series of data appeared on the screen. Education, Masters in Finance, Columbia University. Position, Senior Financial Analyst at Tech Data. Event, whistleblower in the Tech Data money laundering case in 2019. Result, falsely accused of data theft. Terminated. Unofficially blacklisted. The entire room was silent. Alex read every line again. Impossible. Everything Marcus had said was reversed, 180 degrees. She wasn't a thief. She was the one who exposed the thieves. An honest person crushed by the very system he once believed in. Alex stood up, walking to the window. His whole body trembled, not from anger, but from shame. In his head, his own insulting words echoed clearly. "A waitress, overhearing an economic conspiracy? Do you think I'm a child? I won't let anyone make me lose control." Now, he was the one who had been led by the nose, and the only person who had ever told him the truth was her. At the same time, in another part of the city, Vicky sat in her brightly lit penthouse, holding a glass of red wine. Marcus was on the phone. "The stock is down. The board has temporarily suspended Alex. Everything is according to plan." Vicky chuckled softly. "And the waitress?" Marcus shrugged. She disappeared. But it doesn't matter. When the storm passes, no one remembers the name of the messenger. He sipped his wine, his eyes reflecting the arrogance of someone who believed he had won. He didn't know that Alexander Sterling, for the first time in years, no longer believed in control, but believed in the truth. The next morning, Alex called Kane, an underground investigator who had worked for him for years. "Kane, I need the real file on Eliza Vance," he said quickly, "from 2018 until now. Everything. Off the books." Kane gave a dry laugh. "A waitress keeping you up at night?" "Alex?" Alex gripped the phone tightly. "No. A human being making me look at myself." 7 in the morning. Kane's report arrived. Alex opened it, and all doubt vanished. Eliza was the only person who tried to stop a multi-million-euro money laundering scheme. She was framed, fired, and threatened. She has a sister, Chloe Shijo, with a congenital heart defect, living in the Southside neighborhood. Alex slumped his head onto the desk, his hands clasped tightly. It all matched what she said. Her entire life was proof of what he had forgotten. Not everyone without power is weak. The first rays of sun shone into the room, hitting his face tired. But with a new light in his eyes, he stood up, put on his jacket, and said softly like a promise, "This time, I won't leave you alone." In a corner of the Southside neighborhood, Eliza looked up as she heard the sound of a distant car. She didn't know that the man she thought had turned his back was on his way to find her, and the truth he had once lost. The morning in New York City was covered in a thin mist, the sunlight not yet strong enough to illuminate the old side streets. Alex drove the Bentley through the old residential areas, where no one knew his name, and no one cared about billion-dollar corporations. The navigation system led him to the South Side, the neighborhood listed in Kane's report. The street was narrow, paved with gray stones, with small brick houses on both sides. Clotheslines were strung across balconies. A few children played ball in the street, and the smell of toasted bread lingered in the air. A world Alex had never stepped into. He stopped the car in front of house number 3B. The wooden door was peeling paint, the small glass pane taped up. It took a deep breath, his hand still slightly trembling as he held the envelope containing the heart surgeon's appointment paper. There was no money inside the envelope, only a commitment of anonymous funding for Chloe Morales' surgery. Alex knocked 3 times. No answer. On the 4th try, the door cracked open, and a young girl appeared. She was frail, her lips pale, her breathing heavy. There were faint marks of illness on her cheeks, but her eyes bright, clear, and resilient. "Hello," Alex said, his voice slightly hoarse. "I'm an acquaintance of Eliza." The girl looked at him, her eyes scanning from his polished leather shoes to his expensive coat. A tired smile appeared on her lips. "My sister told me not to trust anyone in a suit who comes to our house." Nevertheless, she opened the door wider. "But you can come in. I don't have the strength to kick out visitors." The apartment was small, tidy but poor. The faint smell of chamomile tea lingered. On the table were stacks of medical papers, prescriptions, and a box of cheap tea. Alex sat down on the wooden chair, feeling like it might break under his weight. The room was too quiet, only the slow ticking of the clock audible. On the wall hung a few photos. Eliza in her graduation gown, her smile full of hope. Next to it was a picture of the 2 sisters smiling brightly, hugging each other under the summer sun. Alex looked at the photos for a long time. A strange feeling welled up in his heart. Not pity, but shame. The girl spoke, breaking the silence. "My sister hasn't been home since yesterday morning. I guess she got into trouble at work again." She chuckled softly, then coughed. "She's always like that. She can't keep quiet when she sees injustice." Alex didn't know how to reply. He placed the envelope on the table, "To bury 2 Bravers End, as noted Braver 0. His voice softening, "This is for you." An acquaintance of mine, Dr. Ru Cohen, in cardiology. He can help with the upcoming surgery. The girl looked at the envelope, then at him. You don't have to do this. You don't know who I am, Alex said softly. And perhaps that's better. He paused for a second, then added, I owe your sister more than you think. The girl smiled, her smile weak but sincere. She never asks anyone to owe her anything. She just wants to believe that there are still decent people. Alex left the apartment as the afternoon drew to a close. On the way down the stairs, he stopped, looking at his hand, the hand that had signed hundreds of contracts, that had controlled the entire market. Now trembling just from a conversation with a small girl, he realized what he had lost was not shares, but his humanity. Outside, the wind blew gently. The ringing of children's bicycle bells echoed from the end of the street. Alex looked up at the grey sky, telling himself, she lives in this world, a world I never understood. Evening. Marcus's office was brightly lit. He sat in front of the screen, his voice echoing on the phone. Yes, Sterling has been suspended, but he still hasn't resigned. If he tries to fight back, activate Plan 2. Another voice, cold, feminine, echoed through the speaker. This is Vicky. And the waitress, Marcus smirked. Don't worry, I have friends in the police department. Her file is about to be transferred to an official investigation. Once she's accused of indirect participation in fraud, she'll disappear. Vicky laughed. That's 2 pawns taken out. An empire falls without a shot fired. They didn't know that. At that very moment, Alex had returned to his office, sitting in the dark and listening to the recording from the USB drive again. Vicky's voice echoed in the speaker, mixed with the sound of the sea waves that night. He closed his eyes, and for the first time in years, he prayed not for his company, but for a girl who dared to stand up to people like he once was. Before dawn the next day, the Bentley appeared again in the south side. Alex stood in front of door number 3B, this time with no envelope in his hand, only a decision. If she didn't return, he would find her, not out of debt, but because he knew, in this world full of lies, she was the last piece of truth remaining. On the other side of the street corner, Elisa appeared, her small figure in the early morning mist. She stopped, seeing the black Bentley parked in front of her house, and wondered, had he come to make amends, or to end everything? Dawn cast a thin layer of mist over the south side neighborhood. The first rays of sunlight squeezed through the door crack, illuminating the old wall of house number 3B. Eliza returned after a long night. She was exhausted. Her shoulders slumped, each step heavy, as if carrying the whole world in her head. Everything from yesterday's meeting was still swirling: the scornful laughter, the suspicious looks, and Alex's silent face. But when she turned into the small alley, she froze. The black Bentley was still parked there, quiet as a cut in space. The windows were fogged, but she immediately recognized the figure sitting inside. Alex got out. He was no longer in a neat suit. His tie was removed, his face haggard after a sleepless night. His eyes were no longer arrogant, only tired, and something like remorse. Did you come to finish what happened yesterday? Eliza asked, her voice hoarse. Alex shook his head softly. No, I came to start over. The sentence made her pause momentarily, but Eliza maintained her cold tone. You have nothing left to start over. I told you. I don't want to be involved in your world. Alex nodded, as if accepting the rejection. I understand. After what I allowed you to endure, no one could blame you for wanting to leave. He paused for a second, then spoke slower, lower. But I didn't come to ask for your help for me. I came because of someone named Chloe. Eliza looked up, her heart tightening. What did you just say? Alex took a folded piece of paper from his jacket. This is the appointment paper for your sister's surgery, he said. I contacted Dr. Cohen. the best in heart transplantation. She has been put on the priority list. But if I fail to expose the truth, those people will have full control over the medical funding board. They can postpone the surgery, or worse, remove her from the list. She was stunned, taking a step back. Are you using my sister to pressure me? No, Alex replied, his eyes serious. I am telling you the truth. If they win, Chloe will lose her chance. And I don't want anyone else to pay the price for my mistakes. The air between them was thick. For a long moment, there was only the sound of wind through the iron fence. Eliza looked at the paper in his hand, her eyes blurring with tears. Why are you doing this? Alex took a deep breath. Because you dared to do what I never did in my life, save someone who had nothing left to be saved. He looked straight at her. Help me. Elisa. Not for me, but for Chloe. And for yourself. She was silent for a long time. In her head, the image of her frail sister lying in the hospital bed appeared. Chloe's eyes always brightened when she spoke of her dream of living through one more summer. Eliza turned her face away, trying to hold back a trembling breath. All right, she said softly. I will help you, but not to protect your empire, but to save what you have forgotten trust. Alex bowed his head, his voice deeply solemn. And that is why I need you. In the afternoon, they met again in his office. The pale yellow light of the sunset poured through the glass window, casting long, warm streaks of light over the two of them. Eliza spread the documents on the table, her eyes bright, despite the fatigue. She spoke slowly. Clearly, these subsidiary companies are not real. They were created to launder money through 4 layers of transactions. This is the intermediary chain, and the back door is in Cayman the V. Enterprise's account you mentioned. Alex listened in silence. Every word she spoke was sharp as a knife cutting into his arrogance, but also the light he needed in the darkness. When she looked up and met his gaze, her voice softened. I used to do this job. I know people like them. When people are too smart, they believe no one can find out. But what they forget is their own greed leaves a trail. Alex nodded slightly, his gaze gentle. You speak like an expert. Eliza shrugged. I used to be a financial analyst before I was turned into a criminal in a fake file. In that moment, Alex said nothing, just silently watched her. A woman who had lost everything, still sitting here calm, lucid, and without resentment. He felt small. When the work was finished, it was dark. Eliza gently pushed the laptop away, her voice tired but firm. We can prove all the illegal transactions, but we need more banking data from within the system. If you have access, I will finalize the file. Alex nodded. I will get it. And you, he hesitated, then said slowly, stay tonight. Not for me, but because you need to rest. Eliza smiled faintly, a brief but genuine smile. I'm not used to places with thick glass and expensive tea, Alex replied, his eyes strangely kind. I am also learning how to live in a place without power. A gentle silence fell between them. The sound of the clock, the slight rain outside the window, the sighs of the two people, all merged into a rare moment of peace after the storm. Before leaving, Eliza stopped at the door. You're right, she said softly. I'm helping you, because I don't want Chloe to live in a world where the truth is a luxury. Alex looked at her for a long time, his voice deepening. And I will do everything I can for your sister to live in a better world than the one I created. She didn't say anything, just nodded gently, and left. The door closed, leaving Alex alone in the room, filled with yellow light, where he felt his heart warm for the first time, not because of victory, but because of the trust that had just been returned to him. When Eliza walked out into the hallway, her phone vibrated. An anonymous message appeared. If you continue to help him, the next person won't be Chloe. She froze, her eyes darkening. For the first time, Eliza was truly afraid. That morning, the wind blew strongly through the central square of New York City. On the top floor of the St. Regis Hotel, where the emergency shareholders meeting was about to take place, the atmosphere was thick with tension. Alex walked into the lobby, his stance calm, but his eyes were cold as steel. Following him was Eliza, her face composed, her hair neatly tied back, her gaze deep and bright. From afar, Vicky was waiting with Marcus. She gave a faint smile when she saw Eliza. "It's you again," Vicky said, her voice like a knife scraping glass. "I heard your sister is in the hospital, right? What a pity." Eliza stopped, her eyes never leaving Vicky. "If you touch the innocent," she replied, her voice deep and calm, "then it won't just be your conscience that is cursed." Vicky raised an eyebrow, scoffing. "Who do you think you are to threaten me?" "Not a threat," Eliza said, then turned away. Just a reminder, Alex stood behind her, witnessing the entire exchange. In his gaze, there was something different, no longer suspicion, but a quiet trust that was growing. In the conference room, the shareholders sat in long rows. On the table were copies of the altered merger contract. Alex stood up and began, "Ladies and gentlemen, I have reviewed the entire accounting system, and I believe that not everyone sitting in this room is honest." Marcus smirked. "If you're implying me, be careful. Because the evidence can turn against you," Alex replied calmly. "I have prepared for that, and I am not alone." He turned to Eliza. "Miss Vance, please begin." The light shone on Eliza's face. She stood up, took the remote, and turned on the screen. Her voice was steady, clear, not trembling. "3 months ago, I discovered that the Fairmont Group created a shell company in Cayman named V Enterprises. But the important thing is not just the money being drained, but who authorized the withdrawal." Marcus laughed loudly. "More slander from a restaurant employee. Who do you think will believe you? People who know how to listen to the truth," she replied. Pressing the second button, the screen displayed an internal email from Tech Data, her former company. "Before I was falsely accused of data theft," Eliza said, "I submitted a report exposing the money laundering activities of an executive who has a direct relationship with Harrison. The case was suppressed. I was eliminated from the industry. But a week ago, Alex requested a review of that file." The room erupted in murmurs. Alex stepped forward, placing a folder of documents in front of the board. "This is a copy of the official investigation report from the Financial Authority, and the conclusion is clear. Eliza Vance is the whistleblower, not the culprit." The murmuring increased. Marcus frowned. Vicky's face paled. Alex continued, his voice decisive. "She lost everything just for daring to speak the truth. And today, I want her to have the chance to reclaim that honor." Eliza took a deep breath. Playing the final audio file, Marcus' voice rang out, cold and sharp. "If he doesn't sign, I'll have Vicky handle the kid. Her sister doesn't have long to live anyway." A thunderclap exploded in the room. The shareholders simultaneously looked at each other. Vicky turned ashen, and Marcus jumped up, yelling, "She fabricated it. Fake recording." Eliza calmly pulled out another copy, certified with a legitimate timestamp from the telecommunications company. "I sent the original to the police last night," she said, "and if I don't return, they will release it publicly." Marcus backed away, his voice breaking. You dare?" "Yes?" Eliza cut him off. "Because I have nothing left to lose but the truth." Alex looked at her. Amidst the chaotic noise, he saw Eliza standing straight, her face composed, and he understood. That was the moment when courage became light. An older board member stood up, his voice trembling. "Mr. Sterling, I propose the immediate suspension of all duties for Marcus and Vicky, and the submission of this file to the financial police." Vicky surged forward, screaming, "You will regret this. I loved you." "Alex, You owe me your life. Alex looked at her, his voice deep but calm. You didn't love me, Vicky. You only loved the power I had. And now, it no longer belongs to you. Marcus tried to struggle but was restrained by security. When the door closed behind them, Eliza finally breathed a sigh of relief. She sank slightly into the chair, her entire body trembling. Alex walked over, placing his hand on her shoulder. You did what I never dared to do, he said softly. Eliza looked up, her eyes watering. I only did what was right. Right? He nodded. But not everyone is brave enough to do what is right. When the board left, only the two of them remained in the room. Eliza stood by the window, looking down at the city. The evening wind gently ruffled her hair. The golden light cast on her tired but peaceful face. Alex came to her side. You don't have to be afraid anymore. The police have received the file, and the hospital reported that your sister has been transferred to the priority heart transplant list. I used my name to guarantee it. Eliza turned around, her eyes wide. You? When did you do that? The night you decided not to give up? He replied. I promised you wouldn't stand alone. Eliza said nothing. She looked at him for a long time, and for the first time, her eyes softened. Alex smiled faintly, his gaze warmer than ever. Tomorrow, he said. I want you to join me at the press conference to announce the investigation results. This time, the world will know who is truly telling the truth. 3 days later, the sky over New York City was clear as if washed clean. The morning newspapers simultaneously reported, Alexander Sterling, the man who dared to admit his mistakes, former tech data employee vindicated after 6 years of defamation, 380 million euro merger deal cancelled. A silent coup. Alex sat quietly in his office, reading the lines without feeling proud. The truth had been returned to the rightful person. But in his heart, something else was growing a rare peace after years of struggle. The door opened softly. Eliza stepped in, wearing a simple white shirt, her hair tied back, the morning light hitting her face, making the whole room feel warmer. Good morning, she said softly. Alex looked up, his voice deeper and warmer than usual. How is your sister? The surgery was successful, she replied, a faint smile passing her lips. The doctor says she will make a full recovery. She asked me to thank you. Because of you. We have today. Alex shook his head gently. No. Eliza, you are the one who changed everything. You taught me that sometimes a single truth can save more than an entire empire. Eliza was silent, her eyes settling. I only did what I believed was right. You are the one who made sure it was heard. Alex looked at her for a long time. There was no longer any distance between them. No difference in status. Only two people who had stood together at the boundary of loss and still chose what was right. He walked to the desk, placing a thick folder in front of her. The cover bore the title, The Sterling Foundation for Truth and Transparency. I want to establish a foundation, Alex said, dedicated to people like you, those who are buried for daring to speak the truth, but I don't want to run it alone. I need someone who has been through that and still retained their belief. She looked at him, asking softly, And you think I can? Alex smiled. I don't think. I know. Eliza looked down at the paper, where only one signature line was left blank. She was silent for a moment, then picked up the pen. I remember you once said that you hated being taught by anyone. True, Alex replied, his voice softening. Until I met the person who made me want to listen. The pen moved slowly across the paper. Two signatures lay side by side. A new era began, not with power, but with trust. That afternoon, they left the building together. Alex drove her to the south dock where everything began. The sea was still salty, the wind still cold, but everything seemed different. He looked at the water shimmering with sunlight, saying softly, Do you remember that night? I do. Eliza smiled. I thought you were going to fire me, and I, Alex replied softly, thought you were crazy. But it turned out that madness saved me from myself. She laughed. You've changed a lot. Alex. No, he said slowly, his gaze still towards the horizon. I just started to be afraid of losing someone. Eliza turned to him softly, the smile on her lips fading. Someone? Alex nodded, his voice deep and low. The person who made me understand that the truth is not enough. Without trust, she was silent, the wind gently blowing her soft hair. Alex reached out and softly brushed the lock of hair covering her cheek. The gesture was tender, but in that moment, the distance between two worlds had vanished. 3 months later, the glass building named the Sterling Foundation was officially inaugurated. There was no grand ribbon-cutting ceremony, just a warm morning, a few newspapers, and a few close friends. Chloe, Elisa's sister, had recovered and personally cut the red ribbon. Alex stood next to Eliza, not too far, not too close, just enough for their eyes to always find each other in the crowd. After the ceremony, when everyone had left, only they remained on the steps. The sunset glowed gold on the glass, reflecting their figures together. Eliza said softly, "Do you ever think that all this loss was meant for two strangers to meet at the most crucial time?" Alex looked at her, the corners of his lips curling slightly. If anyone had told me that a year ago, I would have thought they were dreaming. And now I believe. Eliza smiled, her eyes warming. The price of truth is always expensive. True, Alex replied, taking her hand. But sometimes it returns to us the most valuable thing. She asked softly, almost a whisper. What is that? Alex looked deep into her eyes, his gaze no longer that of a businessman, but of a man who truly knew love, a person to trust, and a place to start over. She didn't say anything, just gently rested her head on his shoulder. From a distance, the waves gently lapped the shore, the rhythm of the peace they had exchanged for tears and courage. Alex softly squeezed her hand, feeling that small but certain warmth, as if he were holding his own second chance at life. A few months later, people often saw Alex and Eliza arriving at the foundation office together in the early morning. He often brought her a hot cup of coffee, and she brought a sprig of white jasmine. Both sat by the glass window, discussing the files to support the wrongly accused. The people who had been crushed by the system, as she had been years ago, every time someone was exonerated. Eliza smiled, and Alex just watched her silently, as if in her eyes he was finding the piece of humanity he had lost. One afternoon, when the city was bathed in sunset, Alex said, "If it weren't for you, I would still be sitting in that room, signing contracts with no soul." Eliza replied, her voice soft as the wind, "If it weren't for you, I would forever think that telling the truth was wrong." They looked at each other, and both knew no more words were needed. That night, at the old dock, where the beginning of doubt once lay, Alex handed her a small box. Inside there was no diamond ring, just a small piece of wood engraved with the words, "For the truth." "And for us." Elisa looked up, smiling, her eyes welling up. "I thought you hated emotional things." Alex laughed softly. "I used to think so. Now I know. Emotion is what makes people the most honest." She nodded softly, then whispered, "So, shall we start over?" Alex took her hand, his voice deep and warm. "No, we just continue. Because everything that is most important, in fact, never ended." They stood together, watching the city lights reflect on the water. Where the beginning of lies once was, now the place where a story closed with trust. A gentle wind carried the scent of jasmine, the scent Eliza still placed on his desk every morning. As a reminder, the truth, when held with kindness, will never be lost. And in that silence, two people who were once at opposite ends of the world of power and suffering finally found each other, not in victory, but in peace. When a story concludes, what remains is not the conspiracies or the numbers, but the way people choose to confront the truth. Alexander Sterling, who once believed that power could buy anything, finally found the greatest value in a small thing: trust. And Eliza, the waitress who was once buried under accusations, proved that sometimes, just by daring to tell the truth, you save not only yourself, but also souls that seemed lost. Their story reminds us that, in a noisy world, the truth still has its own voice. It just needs someone brave enough to listen. And trust, no matter how many times it is betrayed, can still be rebuilt. If someone is compassionate enough to believe again, perhaps we have all been Alex, having lost faith, doubting even the good. There are also times we are Eliza, weak, lonely, but still moving forward just because we know we are standing on the side of what is right. Life sometimes doesn't need big victories, just a second to stop. As Alex stopped his pen that night, to hear the honest voice in his heart. What about you? How long has it been since you gave someone or yourself a chance to be trusted again? Share your thoughts below. Perhaps your story will be the small lamp that helps someone find their way home amidst the darkness of doubt. And if today you are tired amidst the lies of everyday life, remember, the truth doesn't make us stronger, but it allows us to live authentically, and that is the real strength.